Welcome back to the garage. We're kind of outside because we're going to do a thing that was requested in my last video, this video that I did on the 3rd generation Charger, 4th generation B-body. One of the comments on there, a lot of comments, and I'm going to address a lot of them today, was on do the history of NASCAR on this body style. And sure, that sounds great. So I'm going to go over that in just a few minutes using my 72, showing some of the things that Chrysler did while designing this car to make it more competitive in NASCAR without using the aero treatments that they did in 69 and 70 with the Daytona and Superbird respectively, because NASCAR had completely outlawed that type of aero in 1971. Now, the first thing I'm going to address, and of course, as I go along, you may comment, and you guys love commenting, and I like it. I learn a lot. Obviously, I guess it's get ideas for videos, so comment below. But I'm going to address some comments. The first one I'm going to address was there was a comment saying that they took 3 years to design their cars. That's not true. That is absolutely ungodly false. Chrysler did a 2-year design cycle. The 66, 67 Dodge Charger, that was a 2-year cycle. They were already designing the 68 in like late 66. They didn't, in fact, Chrysler didn't even use a full 2 years when they designed these cars, because this car was starting to be designed in mid-68 for a 1970 model. They were going to introduce this body style in 1970. That was just the way that Chrysler operated at the time. It's the way most manufacturers operated at the time, was having models have a 2 or 3 year run depending on the complexity. But Chrysler Corporation loved using 2-year runs for their cars. There are some exceptions, and some of those exceptions are because of design issues, changes in the marketplace, or where they just had, like the 1970 B-bodies, where they just didn't have a car ready because of things beyond their control, which was the strike of 1969, in which they released the E-body instead of the B-body because they needed something to fight the Mustang, Camaro, Trans Am, Firebird. And, well, I also was wrong. I'm going to go back to one of the comments there. I was wrong. I forgot that they did not change the unit, the suspension on the E-bodies in 73, because Chrysler at that point knew the car was a lost cause. They put zero development into that car after 1971. There was none. I mean, they changed it up in 72, and that body style stayed for 3 years because they didn't care. The E-bodies were such an absolute colossal failure past 1971 that they did not invest an extra dime in them. In fact, it's almost impossible to tell the difference between a 73 and a 74 E-body. Seriously, it really is no difference. I mean, they got rid of the convertibles for 72. It had one model on the Challenger. It was the Challenger, and then the Rally was an option. You had the Cuda and then the Barracuda. That was it. So I'll address that. Yeah, I was wrong. And it's so sad because they could have put that same suspension into the 73 without much work, being that the cars were identical underneath. Go figure. So the other thing I'm going to address later on is the difference between the 71, 72 Chargers and satellites and the 73, 74. Because I had a comment basically saying that there was no difference. Yes, there was. And we'll get to that a little bit later after we go through this car, showing what Chrysler did from the factory, because up until 1972, you had to order the car from the factory as a body in white with a production body and a production engine. 72 and up, they kind of loosened it a little bit, but it was still the shape of the car. So the sheet metal was the same. So we're going to start at the front and work our way back, because it's very fascinating what Chrysler did. Let's start here at the nose, if I can get it in focus. All right. So I said this is a very bland front. in the last video. And yes, it is. But in Chrysler's eyes, because remember, they were going to Daytona-ize this car. They were going to put a nose cone on it in 1970. Until NASCAR said, well, 71 when it was introduced, but NASCAR said, no, you're not. No more of those aero cars. So it never got the treatment. But what they did by having the bumper set like this, and what they used in NASCAR was the one with the non-hidden headlights. But because of the way the shape was, and for NASCAR, they could block all this off. So you had air intakes over here on this side. You had air intakes over here. And then over there was just blocked off on the high side of the track. So, and the air intake over here was help the engine cooling because since I guess the late 60s, they had gone to a Cal induction on all race cars. So even Chrysler used Cal induction. Next thing is the way they did the splash pan. This was done specifically for NASCAR, because that is when you block all this off, that is where the air is coming. And because of all the development they did on the Daytona and the Superbird, they knew that there was a low pressure area there that they could suck plenty of air in and be able to, well, let's let this truck go by, be able to get enough air into the radiator at speed to keep the engine cool. So and what they did is they also put a spoiler down here on the car to help really ram the air in there to keep it cool. Now, Petty switched to this body style in mid-72 because he saw that the longer hood with that front treatment was much better at high speeds. And it really was than the Plymouth. Because the Plymouth had indentations in the hood which actually disturbed the air a little bit. This had a very sleek hood. The race cars used the power bulge hood, gave it more room for the engine intake. It was kind of tricky the way they did their cars. So that is the way they did the front and the way the nose is, because this is made for high speed. Now, let's pop the hood. I'm going to show you something. Okay. So we're going to come back to under the hood a little later, but see, that is why there's so much space here as opposed to a Challenger, which ends right about here. Challenger ends right. They did that for NASCAR because they had to get the longer, sleeker hood to be able to make the car flow better. And that is why that is shaped like that. That is why there's so much basically wasted space there. Now in the 70 and down, Chrysler, because they spent more money on the cars, put a plate over this to kind of seal it in. Another fun fact on these cars is that they really weren't designed for air conditioning. So air conditioning as an afterthought. So the condenser sits right in front of the radiator with absolutely no sealing around it. See, the radiator is sealed pretty much by the core support, but this air can flow around the condenser. So that's why if you do 134, you have to put, well, a helper fan to keep the Freon cool. This is a side note. But yeah, so that's why that is like that. So as we go down the side of the car, all these different techniques here were made to flow air over the car smoothly. Now in the 71, 72, what got carried over to 73, 74 was this greenhouse. The windshield had a good enough rake on it to be able to make it aerodynamic at speed, but then this back window was much more aerodynamic than the early, even the Charger 500. It was very low turbulence and a very good flow. Also the way that they did the body lines across the car were for airflow. So then the trunk. Now on the street version, they did put a little aero lip on there, and NASCAR actually let them accentuate that with spoilers starting, I think, at 73, and the spoilers got taller and taller over time to make the cars more stable because they were still hitting pretty high speeds. So there is a built-in spoiler in the back of the Charger to work off of. Now this is where the design for NASCAR really comes into play, and pardon the mess, I do use the car, so these two rear wells are different shapes. See, that one's very wide, that one's narrow. This is a stock bodied car. I have done nothing to the body of this car. I've replaced some panels, but this is stock. The reason that this is different is that on a super speedway, that tire goes up less into the body than that tire. So the wheel wells for this car were designed with super speedways in mind, since the suspension traveled way up into the wheel well on that side with all the downforce from going around the super speedway banks. And the way that they did the back, it made it easier for them on NASCAR to make it a very smooth tail, to be able to have it get a very slick flow in the back, because you really want it cut off to get a better airflow. Now with the front rear wells, they did the same thing because of body in white. When they designed this car, it was still going to be body in white. The wheel wells on this car are enormous on both sides and the front, and once again, that is for NASCAR. That is to give them more space and more room for the tires to travel when they're going around super speedways. This car was designed for super speedways. Super speedways is what Chrysler always focused on, no matter what. They focused on, they wanted to win Daytona. They wanted to win Talladega. That was literally their goal. So, I mean, there is the basic overview of how Chrysler set this car up to win at NASCAR. Unfortunately, NASCAR had different ideas, and so did they. Because by the time they get it out, NASCAR had pulled the rug on aero cars, and then Ford pulled out, and then Chrysler's like, yeah, I think we're kind of done too, because that whole muscle car thing's over, and it's just a waste of money to sell high-performance cars. So then they went back to just having privateers. I'm going to address that comment earlier about that there's no difference between these 71, 72, and 73, 74, and specifically the front fenders. I'm going to show pictures. Well, first I'm going to show my car. I'm going to show a picture of a 73, and then I'm going to show body panels, because they redid all the wheel wells. This was done for NASCAR. It was also done for looks. It kind of had a double-edged sword. It had a double-edged sword in that they wanted to be able to give it a little better street look, but then also it was also to help with a little bit of airflow. So first, the wheel wells. This is a 72 wheel well. Notice the size of the sheet metal above the opening. Now I'm going to show a picture of a 73. Notice how much shorter that is. They made the wheel well come way up into here. The sheet metal above is very, very small. That is not even close to the same car. That is why it's actually the 3rd and a half generation, the 73, 74, because it doesn't have much in common. They also changed the front bumpers. If you look at the front bumpers, it's a lot smoother up in front than this one. It's very verbose. It actually smoothed out, and it actually translated to the NASCAR. And remember, they also had to set them further out in 74 for a 5-mile-per-hour crash, and only 2.5-mile-per-hour crash in the 74. So as we go down the car, the doors on the 73 are different than a 72. The body line's different. 72 has this harsh body line here. 73 does not. And it also has a body line down here that the 73 does not have. Okay, now where the big changes come. And a lot of it was either to aesthetics, because General Motors and Ford had designed new cars for 72 that were kicking kicking their ass up and down the street in sales. And it had a very soft rear body line. So that's why Chrysler got rid of, and now on a regular Charger, it's shaped like a little triangle here. But still, you had the same basic kind of real full sail panel back here. The 73 got rid of it. It actually got softer, a softer turn, and the small windows went away for an opera window in the back, giving it giving this a smaller C-panel look and a longer roof line look. Also, the wheel well openings were changed in the rear of the car. They were made taller. They actually came up to here to give the car a bigger stance, you know, a sleeker body line, because this has very small wheel openings to the size of the car. Also, what they changed in '73 was this, the body line in the back. And it actually did help with aerodynamics, because what they did is they took this and they actually flattened this out over the top of the car. And I'll show pictures of a '73 compared to this. So what that did is it gave it a little bit of a smoother run in the back. The trunks were unchanged. Basically for '73, '74, the only thing that could convert over from '73, '74, even though it wouldn't be right, is the hood, because they change the hood every year, except for the power bulge, which had no air inlets on it for your vent. The roof, the greenhouse was interchangeable. They just changed the way the back window was. That's all a body plug in there anyway. And the trunk. Those are the only things that are interchangeable between the '71, '72 and the '73, '74. That is it. Now there's one more thing that no one talks about, and this is how different these cars are, is under the hood. What do you mean by that, Dennis? Well, let me show you. Do you see how my as we look under the hood of my '72, so '71, '72 was the same. As you see, the inner fender on the car is solid, with just an access hole there. There's another little access thing there with a piece of tar paper, basically tar paper, sealing it up. And the same on this side, where you have a small access that you can't really see underneath the battery. And then in the back, there's also a little piece of tar paper to cover the holes, to be able to adjust the front end, you know, the upper control arms. Now, '73, I'm going to show the picture here. The '73, as you see, has a giant piece of tar paper on the passenger side, and there's tar paper also on the driver's side. That's because the holes are bigger on a '73. They completely changed the way the inner fenders were made. It was done to save cost, but also make it easier to adjust the front end, because you didn't have to have these plates that were bolted in the front of the car. So there is another major difference between the '73, '74, '71, '72 is the inner fenders. So see, they are far from the same car. And honestly, it's really weird that they just weren't called the 4th generation Charger, because it had such little in common with the '71, '72 that it was like a completely different car. And you can see through all the pictures and all the descriptions, it really didn't have any of the actual design cues, except for the hood, the greenhouse, and the trunk. The rest was completely different. How did this actually translate into NASCAR wins and NASCAR placing during the lifespan of this car during NASCAR racing? Well, it raced for 7 years, and in that 7 years, it raced in about 220 events. And this body style won 54 races in that time. That's actually not so bad. It won 24.5% of the races it was in. Now the dominance was really from 1975 to '71. Because '71 though, in '71 Petty won most of the races that year. Out of like 41 races, he won like 26. And you know, Dodge, the Charger, managed to win 8. So I mean, Chrysler as a whole in '71 was at its peak. So, you know, if you take out 1971 with its only 8 wins out of 40 races, it then 4 wins in 1972, 8 in '73, 10 in '74, 13 in '75, 6 in '76, and 6 in '77. The reason though for '75 and '76 is that General Motors had gone full bore at this point. Ford had stepped out, so the France family went and told General Motors to bring in, you know, cars so they could have a NASCAR series. Their cars were pretty slick. They had come out with a very aerodynamic design. They had very good drivers, and there were just more of them. I mean, Petty Enterprises pretty much fielded 2 cars. Really imbalanced way to look at it. But overall, the car design did very well over that time. So, and Richard Petty did extremely well at that time. He won 24% of races from 1972 to 1977. In 72, he only did 1 race. He won only 1 race in this car. But still, I mean, Petty, obviously, if you with 71, I mean, he was the most dominant driver of that time. So as a NASCAR, it wasn't bad, considering that there was absolutely zero support from Chrysler Corporation all through that period. And by 75, 76, Chrysler was starting to be in a lot of fiscal trouble. So for this car to actually have that well of a track record is quite impressive. I hope you got some from this, and I really want to hear your comments, especially on, you know, anything about this body style Charger, any errors and omissions that I made, because I know I made them, even though I try to be as thorough as possible. Any other thoughts you have on NASCAR from that time period, you know, and just the competition of the Charger at that time. You know, and once again, I do thank you for watching this to this point. And if you did, hey, hit that like. You know, please subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. If you like talking about cars, I would mainly talk about this car. You know, also I am working on an Oldsmobile Tornado, trying to get that running. I'll work on other old classic cars, and I'll do other historical events. I'll even talk about some new stuff. But I also talk about, you know, other types of classics that we have now, which is like that BMW convertible. It's a 95. It's 30 years old. I also have an 89 BMW. And I'll talk about them and the engineering on them and things that happened along that way that actually other manufacturers took from BMW, or stuff that became commonplace. So if you enjoy that type of stuff, subscribe. It's free to subscribe. You don't get charged for it. You can have as many subscriptions as you want. That's beautiful. I would love if you subscribed. I'm trying to get to 10,000 subscriptions, just as a goal. Maybe I'll shave my beard. Also, ring the bell if you want to see more content like this. Also, I got a comment, my last one, about the shirt I was wearing. I was wearing a 69 Charger shirt. So here is a newer shirt from my spread shop. Yes, it is my car. It is 72 Dodge Charger doing a burnout. So there we go. And as always, I thank you for watching. And if you have a cool old car, or, you know, something fun, and that BMW is fun to drive, take them out, because you'll make someone's day, probably your own. And I'll talk to you very soon.